Hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Capitol Watch and our review of the 2013 regular session of the Missouri General Assembly. And joining me to discuss the General Assembly's actions and lack of action in some cases is Mike Reed, our Associate Executive Director for Advocacy and our Chief Lobbyist, and Mike Grote, our Governmental Relations Consultant. And gentlemen, thanks a lot for being with us. And Mike Reed, let's start with you. Overall, how would you evaluate the session for public education?
Well, overall, for public education, I think that we didn't, I guess we can best say we didn't get hurt, or we weren't hurt badly. There were a lot of questions about public education, and there were a lot of ideas brought up to change certain things in public education. Some were good ideas, some were not quite so good ideas, but overall, we weren't hurt. I guess the best way to say it.
Of course, the budget is always of concern, Mike Grote, and so how did we do as far as school funding is concerned?
Well, school funding held at a constant. There are some marginal increases, but in terms of full funding for the formula, we're still not there yet. The budget really isn't out of the woods yet, though. Even though it was passed a full week ago, there's a couple of items that needed to get addressed in order to make the budget balance. And unfortunately, those items didn't make it across the finish line. There was a tax amnesty provision. There were some of the circuit breaker provisions that the governor has vetoed. And so right now we're looking at a budget that could be potentially unbalanced. At the same time, though, we have seen increase in revenue based on what they actually created the budget on. So there's an additional $400–500 million laying around in the state's coffers, and hopefully we'll see some of that come to education at the governor's discretion.
So a slight increase in formula funding, but we maybe shouldn't count on that?
That's always a possibility.
All right. Mike Reed, one of our priorities for the session was to extend some provisions of the Sunshine Law that expired earlier this year regarding school safety records. What happened on that?
That's right. The school safety records provision of the Sunshine Law, where we could keep those confidential, expired at the end of last year. Thinking that would be a relatively easy piece of legislation to pass, it did pass. It passed with 2 hours left, and so schools no longer have this provision that it is open for people to inspect, and there is no sunset on it. So our records concerning such activities and how we deal with intruders and how we deal with those kinds of questionable activities of outsiders are not subject to the Sunshine Law. So it's a very big win for students. We really appreciate the help of Representative Caleb Jones and Senator Mike Kehoe in pushing this, because they took this ball and ran with it, and it was very, very important to students.
And we would expect the governor to sign that bill.
We do.
Yeah. Mike, another piece of legislation dealt with school safety and the ability of schools to have officers in school buildings. Tell us about that.
That's right. This came out of Blue Springs, because Blue Springs presently has its own certified police officer police force, and it gives other school districts the opportunity to hire people to be police officers for the school. They must go through regular police training. They must be certified post-trained so that they can be police officers, and they must have an agreement between the school district and all the jurisdictions that the school district covers. So that means sheriffs and police departments. So it gives another way for students to be protected, and some schools are looking at this. It's not a mandatory situation, but a number of schools are looking to hire their own police department.
Mike Grote, another issue that we've worked on for many years has to do with the prevailing wage, and this affects school construction projects. And we had some legislation on that. How does it change prevailing wage?
We did. Well, there was a couple of things that started out this year with prevailing wage. There was kind of an overall elimination of prevailing wage legislation, which did not go through. And a lot of what helped us with HB 34 is actually what's taken place in Joplin. So there was definitely a strong push to help schools rebuild and reduce those prevailing wage, especially in some communities where we're using St. Louis and Kansas City, which is a much higher dollar amount as that prevailing wage. So this definitely will help schools in their construction process to deal with the prevailing wage, which is closer to that local community's dollar amount that they're spending.
Mike, some other bills that affect us, maybe not the most significant bills in the world, but we wanted to mention those as well. One bill dealt with schools and federal holidays.
Schools and federal, this is a problem that in some people's, in some person's minds, some individuals believe that we cannot celebrate certain holidays, and so this bill was passed to make sure that if there is a federal holiday, the school district cannot do anything to impede the celebration of that. So Martin Luther King Day, Columbus Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July are all federal holidays, and they must be recognized as such and called by their name as they are recognized in the federal holiday. It was interesting that it got passed. That's something that took up a lot of time, and some people think that maybe is a problem looking, a solution looking for a problem.
Mm-hmm. Another bill, Mike, has to do with the open carry of firearms. What does that bill do?
That bill is a very interesting bill. The original part of that bill speaks of the fact that you cannot, state employees and state officials cannot do anything to stop the enforcement of the Second Amendment. And so if in fact a federal officer comes in and tries to enforce a federal amendment, local people cannot enforce that. An interesting concept constitutionally. Also in the bill, it says that school districts cannot stop individuals who have carrying concealed weapons from carrying a weapon openly on the premises. It also has some other questions about people who are designated as to carry firearms in schools, and they must have a certain type of training, not a full post-training, police officer safety training, and what they can and cannot do. This bill has some problems with it with the governor, I understand, and it may in fact be vetoed. At least it's up there for consideration and veto. There were a number of bills dealing with firearms and Second Amendments and where are they in public schools. The majority of them passed. Let the school district and the Board of Education determine what is appropriate for that district.
Another one of those bills, Mike, I think was Senate Bill 75 that
Senate
dealt with some school curriculum issues.
That's right. That originally started out with certain mandates on it, and it was the all-encompassing Second Amendment bill. In the end, the mandates were taken off, but it talks about making sure that schools have training and awareness for outsider and intruder. So there is a training for intruders and how do school districts and how do personnel react to such a situation. And it also has a provision that we all smiled at to encourage schools to use the NRA Eddie Eagle program for early childhood first and second graders to let them know about firearms. And we watched the presentation, and it is really what it says is if you see a gun, leave it alone and go tell an adult. So it's out there. It's not a mandate, but it's out there for schools to use if they want to.
Mike, another bill has to do with diabetes care. What does that one do?
That's right. This one is sponsored by the American Diabetes Association, and what it says is that people shall be aware, and there shall be certain training there should be certain training for various people in the school system, including coaches, teachers, etc., on how to administer diabetic shots, etc. So it's more an awareness bill. This is the first year it came through and was passed very quickly. The testimony in the bill said that people can be trained in 15 minutes. Again, it is something that we need to be aware of to make sure that when we have children who have such a condition that we can help them to make sure that they don't have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mike Grote, another bill that passed has to do with school boards and how they can vote and using technology. And
sure.
Can you tell us about that one?
This came about by Senator Maria Chapal-Nadal, who is both a senator and a school board member, had an issue with wanting to be able to vote through a not through teleconference, through video conference, and recognized that couldn't be done. And so this was actually a piece of legislation that she put forward that says if you're able to attend through video conference, whether it be Skype or any of the new modern methods we have, that you should be able to vote and participate in those school board meetings. So that was a first time this year issue as well that was able to make it through the process.
Could be helpful to school boards in some circumstances.
Well, could be.
Another issue, Mike, has to do with the Kansas City School Board and reduction in the number of members. Tell us about that one, Mike.
Yes, this bill was. There were a couple of bills put in. This one reduces the number of Kansas City's members of the Kansas City School Board from 9 to 7. Kansas City is the only school district that has a 9-member board. This moves back to a 7-member board. Some of the people will run in district again, and some will run at large. It is a change that is the people in Kansas City are trying to get more people energized and run in school board elections. Kansas City has some other problems. They vote at a different time for the municipal elections as they do for the school board elections, and so that part did not pass, but this part did, at least bringing it down to a smaller number board.
And Mike Reed, probably one of the most significant pieces of legislation passed this year by the General Assembly is one that we're quite concerned about. House Bill 253. It has to do with a very significant tax cut for the state of Missouri. Tell us what that bill does, first of all.
House Bill 253 deals with a tax cut, and certain corporate taxes are reduced, a reduction of taxes. And what we see is this will be a reduction in general revenue. According to our figures, there may be as much as a $900 million hit, from a $450 million hit to a $900 million hit in general revenue, a reduction in the amount of money that will be available to schools. We do not fund schools right now fully, and the formula is not fully funded. So this reduction would be a reduction for us, potential reduction for public schools, a reduction for colleges, for prisons, all of the people, all the groups that take public money through general revenue. So it's very, very important. What the sponsors are trying to do is to make sure that we do not lose business to Kansas. Kansas did a large tax cut, and in hoping to get business, thinking that trickle-down economics would then spur business. This is a result of that, and so that's where it's going. But we believe it could be very damaging to public education, and so we are against this bill, and we encourage the governor to veto this bill, and we encourage the legislature to uphold the governor's veto. That all hasn't happened at the time that we're doing this recording, but we think this could be very damaging to public schools.
And Mike Grote, so where do we go from here? The governor has expressed some concerns about this bill. As we're recording this program, he has not taken action on it, but should he veto the bill, what happens next?
Should he veto the bill, it looks like we'll come back for a veto session, which is in September, and there'll be an attempt to override the governor's veto. Right now, I don't think there are the votes out there to be able to do that override, and I think it's questionable whether that'll be successful. But I know this has been very important to the Republican-controlled legislature, and they'll definitely make a push, and they'll definitely try to be successful in that effort.
So, Mike Reed, this summer, should our members be active in contacting their legislators on this issue?
Oh, certainly, and we will continue to let our members know what is going on, and to let the members of the General Assembly know that a reduction in the total amount of general revenue is going to be a reduction in the amount of money that schools have. And the bottom line is this will be a tax increase. If we reduce the money that we get in general revenue, we're going to have to find the money someplace else, and it's going to come back on making sure that the levies go higher, and so the property taxes are going to have to pay for more of the public schools. Our costs are out there, and so we're not going to be able to reduce them. It doesn't look like.
Mike, another issue that passed has to do with mandatory reporting in cases of abuse, and how does that impact school districts?
It increases and changes the mandatory people who are required to report. It changes the way that they report. I think it may be problematic to certain districts. It's something we're going to have to look at, and we will have to rewrite some of the policies that we have on mandatory reporters.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some issues that did not pass, Mike Grote. One of those had to do with tenure reform and teacher evaluations. Quite a controversial issue that popped up in a couple of different places in the session. What happened on that?
Sure. This was tenure reform was definitely one of the big issues of the session, and it ranged from it was teacher evaluation / tenure reform was kind of all rolled into one package. And how do we deal with both teachers, administrators, superintendents, et cetera, and how we do some sort of an evaluation and how that plays into their tenure package. There was definitely legislation that was out there that was pushed very strongly by both Students First as well as a couple of other organizations that looked at how do we eliminate tenure, or in lieu thereof, do some sort of an evaluation that makes sure that in order to get tenure, that these teachers are meeting certain marks and are accomplishing what they should be in the classroom. And that's an issue that we worked very strongly on this year to make sure that we did have quality teachers in those school buildings. And it didn't pass. It met its demise in more than one occasion, both in the House and in the Senate. We had legislators that recognized there were some innate problems with how it was being put together.
Mm-hmm. Another issue, priority that we had, Mike, was tax credit reform. We talked a lot about that going into the session. And unfortunately, the kind of had the same result this year, didn't we? A difference between the House and Senate on tax credit.
We did. There were several bills that were pushed, and there was a lot of discussion on tax credit reform. It was one of the positions that we had, both Missouri School Board Association and the Education Roundtable. That was one of our important things on tax credit reform. Our own Melissa Randall was on the committee that gave ideas to the General Assembly and the governor on how to do that. All that being said, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of give and take. It went a little farther this year, I think, than it has in the past, Michael. It came close, but it did not get across the finish line. I think we will see a big push next year again for tax credit reform. But it is very important because, as we know, this is a large amount of money that comes off right off the top of general revenue. This is a $600 to $750 million bite at the apple that comes right off the top. And so something needs to be done about tax credit reform to make sure that the tax credits do what they're supposed to do and encourage business as they are supposed to encourage business.
And the point being, Mike, that if there's decreased spending on tax credits, that would free up revenue for other purposes, such as K-12 education.
That's right.
And there were a couple of tax credit extensions which failed in the final hours. So we'll have to see how that calculates back into the budget for next year in addressing some of these comprehensive tax credit packages that are out there. So it's not just what is tax credit reform, but it's what tax credits move forward and how, as Mike said, how those are used and be able to assure that they are providing a return on investment for the state.
Mm-hmm. Another issue that received a lot of discussion has to do with the Common Core state standards that are being implemented throughout the country in quite a number of states, and there's been some movement to delay or even stop implementation of Common Core, and we had some legislation on that, but that didn't go anywhere, did it?
It was one of the final pieces of legislation to fail, actually, in the Senate with about an hour left to go. Senator Lamping brought that issue back up, and they actually didn't spend. I think they recognized that it wasn't going to pass. They spent a few minutes on it, and he laid it back over. And so in the final hours, it made one last run. But was not successful this year.
I think we'll see that again next year, and I think it's very important that our members understand what Common Core is and what it isn't. And there's a lot of discussion out there of how it works and how it affects school districts. But we will be seeing this all over the summer, and we will be seeing it again next year.
Mm-hmm. Another issue, Mike, that we saw a little progress on this year, we've worked on this one for a number of years as well, bonding capacity for school districts. What happened on that one?
Well, we got it out of committee. We got the bill introduced, we got it out of committee. We will keep working on it. This bill that we had would let districts determine at a vote to exceed the 15% bonding capacity, and they could go up to 25%. And it would take. It was an interesting interesting concept. You would vote first on increasing the amount of bonded indebtedness, and then at the same time vote on issuing the bond. So it would take two yes votes, to get it through. We ran into some opposition from a couple of groups, and we will be working with those groups again over the summer. But we did have some discussion on it. We look at it as an economic development tool. There is a tremendous pent-up need for increased construction projects in various schools, and we think that this would help push the economy and put people back to work. So it is an economic development tool as well as it helps schools.
And we were able to further that discussion. We've actually had more legislators recognize this need and came around towards the end of session wanting to be supportive and figuring out how we can move forward and help on this next year.
So there are no shortage of education issues once again this session, gentlemen, and now the regular session is over. And Mike Reed, as we mentioned before, certainly on the tax cut bill, but probably on other issues as well. Our members need to stay in contact with their legislators during when they're not in session. Isn't that right?
Oh, this is the great time to go out, sit down and talk to your legislators, talk to them about what happened and what didn't happen and how their actions affect the students in their district. Make those relationships because, again, you're an elected official with an elected official, both working with budget problems, both working with limited resources and trying to make sure what's best for your district and for the state. And so it's extremely important to keep those relationships going and let them know what's happening. And in the fall, bring people in to make sure that when school is starting that they are included in the start of school.
All right, Mike Reed, Mike Grote, thanks a lot for being with us on our program. Thanks a lot for your good work during the legislative session. We appreciate all your efforts on behalf of MSBA and behalf of public education as well. And we thank you for joining us on this special edition of MSBA's Capital Watch.